All right, we're on, gentlemen. This is Rebecca Kosas from CHIA of California, and I'm here with Nathan Pierce of Family Protection Ministries and John McGowan, Vice President of CHIA's Board of Directors, and we're here for our Freedom Friday discussion. So glad you could all join us, and thanks for joining me, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
What a great time to have a discussion Friday, just before we break for the weekend. Talk about the things that we're excited about.
Yes.
And some of the things that we're kind of concerned about too, but we want our listeners to be aware and educated, and that's why we're having this. So let's go ahead and start with the Sixth Circuit Court decision. And I realize that wasn't actually, technically they didn't come to a decision on that, but that was concerning to us. And I wonder, John, if you could fill us in a little bit on what's happening with that. What happened? Why was that a concern to us? And
Sure.
how was it resolved?
Sure. So if you remember last time we spoke, Rebecca, there was a concern because there was a Sixth Circuit decision that came out regarding some parents had sued in Michigan, saying that the public school system there was so deplorable that the courts should declare that their children have a fundamental right to an education. And certainly we're sympathetic with public school children trying to get a good education in a poor system. We understand that. But the panel, the Sixth Circuit three-judge panel, agreed with them that the system there in the Detroit area was so bad that they went ahead and created a new fundamental right in the Constitution for an education. And that had never been done before. Mm-hmm. And it was concerning to us because the implications there could be far and wide regarding government intrusion into all kinds of schools, not just public school. But if education all of a sudden was a fundamental right, then that means, that right needed to be potentially inspected and scrutinized in private school settings and homeschool settings. It gave a foothold for the government to get involved in all parts of education. So the HSLDA and others got involved in that case and asked for a review by the full panel, the full court panel, and it was granted. So the full Sixth Circuit Court granted review, which they can do when a smaller panel of that court makes a decision, and they recognized that finding a new fundamental right was a big deal. So they agreed to review that. And the reason why HSLDA and others, including us, was looking at that and wanted to challenge that was, like I said, the ramifications would be felt in every conceivable corner of education, including homeschool, including private schools. And it piggybacked on, if you recall, Professor Bartholet's call to essentially outlaw homeschooling across the United States. It really fit well with her narrative that the government had to take a full-on, overview of all aspects of education. So that's why we got involved and HSLDA got involved. And before the full panel could review it and make a decision, the state and the plaintiffs resolved the case. So they settled the case. So because that happened, the appeal was dismissed. And it has the effect of abolishing that three-judge panel's decision. So once the 16-judge panel decided to take it up, that nullified that original decision that we didn't like. And even though they didn't ultimately make a decision as the full panel, once the case was dismissed, it had the same effect of nullifying the original ruling that there was that fundamental right. So it's a good result.
A good result. But yeah. Did we dodge a bullet? Or any idea how the full Sixth Circuit Court would have gone on that? Is there any way to know, any way to predict?
Yeah, I think that it's even that three-judge panel, when they wrote their opinion, they recognized that they were doing something that was significant. They recognized that finding a brand new fundamental right in the Constitution was not something that um, happens very often, and they knew it was a big deal. So I think that there was a decent chance that the full panel was going to overrule them. But you're right, we don't know. You never know. We've seen some other rulings come down in the last couple of weeks and other cases that show us and prove to us that you just never know. So it's a good result. We're happy that it ended the way that it did. I think that they never should have ruled that way in the first place, and there was a decent chance that the full panel was going to overrule them, but you don't know. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Well, thanks for explaining that. And you mentioned that it played very well into Professor Elizabeth Bartholet's hand from Harvard University. And everybody's been, I think she's the head, I'm not going to go into that much, but everybody was very concerned with her desire to have a presumptive ban on homeschooling, and that she recognized that legislatively, she probably didn't have much of a chance of getting that ban on homeschooling, but to look at it from a federal perspective. So I just want to talk a little bit about that with you, Nathan. I know you're familiar with the recent Cato Institute discussion that they invited Professor Bartholet to come in and defend her stand, so to speak. There were other speakers there. There was Milton Gaither, who is is a homeschool historian, so to speak. He's a researcher, and also Neil McCluskey of Cato Institute, as well as Carrie McDonald from Foundation for Economic Education. And they had this very interesting discussion. What was your kind of take on that, Nathan?
Yeah, so it was very interesting. It's a long video to watch and difficult one to watch. It's about an hour and 20 minutes or so. A lot of ground was covered during that discussion. I will tell you right up front, it is not for the faint of heart. It was a bit stressful to watch because a lot of accusations were made, and a lot of things were needing to be defended in the course of that discussion. And Carrie McDonald, I really appreciated how she kept coming back to the issues of freedom, the issues of parental rights, the issues of needing to have some sort of a reason why you would go out and regulate something that's a legitimate reason. Mm-hmm. And so
she was really the lone voice, I thought, in that discussion for parents, and the lone voice for constitutional liberties.
Yes. You had Elizabeth Bartholet, who's come out with all of this information in her law review article and subsequent interviews and things that has really made a case for her own idea of how restricted homeschooling should be, and like you said, a presumptive ban, assuming that parents should not have this right or the option, this educational choice shouldn't even exist unless somebody can prove that they should be allowed to do it. They have the wherewithal to do this, and that's not how our country works. We don't do things that way. The conversation circled back around to that several times. Milton Gaither, who was a professor of education, discussed the history of homeschooling. There were a few issues that he brought up that kind of concerned me. I felt I disagreed with some of where he was coming from in terms of what is the makeup of the homeschool community today. What was it even in the 90s? He referred to the homeschool community in the 90s as mostly antagonistic Christian fundamentalists, and that's sort of a hot way to address the homeschool community. And even for those that are religious in their perspective on education as well as the rest of life, it's kind of a inflammatory statement. But I mean, there's a lot of folks that choose homeschooling for a variety of reasons. But right. I think it comes down to fundamentally the issues of values and choosing education, private home education specifically. The biggest issue for parents is values, is being able to teach their children what they believe is right and wrong, it's really critical, especially in today's culture where there's so much confusion surrounding that. Mm-hmm. And if we go after that freedom to choose what to teach to our children, what freedom is left really in education, you know? Mm-hmm. And yeah. I think that the video, if you do watch it through, I think you see that Elizabeth Bartholet actually has a very strong feeling about that particular issue, and that really comes out. And so there are still issues of worldview perspective that's really driving a lot of these conversations about not only restricting homeschooling, but like you said, the phrase presumptive ban on homeschooling, coming at it full force and saying this has too much liberty, this has too much freedom. Parents have too much ability to teach their children their values, and that's just a complete turning away from the foundation that our country was based on. But also as parents, what we want to see are our freedoms to pass on information to our children, to teach them how to live, how to function in life, and to be good citizens. Mm-hmm. And so there was a lot of back and forth. Appreciated Carrie McDonald sort of carrying the torch of freedom in those conversations. One part of the conversation there too was just about the issues of parents not only being able to share their values, but parents have what the world looks at in terms of parents and how they treat their children. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the accusations that was made, was that it's too dangerous to allow children to be left at home. And that's incredibly disturbing, but it's also flawed, as we have published information in the past with studies done by Brian Ray, as well as Roger Williams, about how the studies line up with homeschool students versus your average public school students, and abuse related to students in those different areas of education. The data just doesn't show that homeschool students are more likely to be abused than children in a public school setting. Mm-hmm. That's not what the data shows, and that needs to be stated over and over again. That is a false premise. Mm-hmm. And going after homeschooling to regulate it because of that false premise is not right. It's not wise. It's not good policy. Mm-hmm. And as we said back in 2018 with the case that was being dealt with here in California, and it stirred up some legislation, home visits for private homeschoolers, that same idea of legislation based on sensationalism, a disturbing story driving people to make legislation, that should not be how we get our policy. It needs to be more thought out than that.
Yeah, bad situations create bad policy. I think that's one of the things we discussed back in 2018. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
So overall, it was an interesting debate, discussion. And it was really interesting to see how, I think your words were, Rebecca, how reasonable that some people make it sound that we should just have a drop-in visit from a government inspector once a year.
Compared to Professor Bartholet's views,
right.
Oh, well, that's not that big of a deal.
Right. Right. So, but, you know, letting them have a win like that, of having a government inspector come and check out every private homeschooler's home once a year, is an incredible invasion of privacy. It's unconstitutional, you know. And why target one group of parents, families, children in California or in the whole state, the whole nation, with that type of invasion, you know, that kind of inspection of our homes. That's just that's really crazy, and we need to call it what it is, and not say, you know, well, at least it's legal, you know. I mean, and it is, like you said, it is amazing how reasonable some people think that sounds, and we need to not let ourselves be convinced of that because really once there is that step, it's like there will be blood in the water, and they'll start circling for taking away every other freedom that ever existed. And like we saw back in 2018, we saw the recommendation, we saw the legislation for home visits, home inspections, and then we also saw the creation of a panel, a committee that would look into, you know, how can we have more restrictions on homeschooling? We can have more regulation for curriculum, for health standards, for certification of teachers. You know, all of these things, if it starts with one, it rapidly spreads.
Right, absolutely. And I know John was having some sound issues, so he had to step out, and we're going to admit him back again and see if this helps. Can you hear us now, John? Okay, all right, great. So, you know, something that came out in that Cato discussion was the fact that, you know, the majority of child fatalities actually take place from birth to 4 years old. And so why not regulate them? And she was very in favor of that, very much in favor of home visits for parents with small, you know, preschool age children. Another concern of hers is private schools with a campus, that they should be regulated as well. She's just, you know, but she's starting with homeschooling. So just so that our audience our listeners can know that it's starting with homeschooling, but she has no intention, and academic elites like her have no intention of stopping there. It'll be private education, and it'll be parents at home. Let's see if this works again. Parents at home with their little children too. So, and as you said, I'm very concerned about the sympathetic parents who feel like, well, we have nothing to hide. And if we give up this one little bit of freedom, if we can just save one child, I think it's important to keep, you know, reminding them that is very dangerous. We understand your heart. We understand your desire to protect children. We all want to protect children, and child abuse is horrendous. But we can't protect children by giving up our rights, by giving up our own protections. We can better protect children by dealing with the laws and the systems that are created specifically for child abuse. So I think that's important. John, are you with us? Can you hear us now?
I think so. I'm having some problems over here, so I apologize if it knocks me off again.
Yeah, no problem. Let's go ahead and there are a couple of other things I wanted to touch on briefly. The Supreme Court decision, as we've said, we're all just, you know, lots happening these days, and I know families and homeschool group leaders too want to know how that could potentially affect them right now as people of faith. And then we'll just go ahead and quickly wrap it up. Well, John, if you can discuss the Supreme Court decision, and Nathan briefly AB 77. You said I think all of us have been being asked, you know, what does this really mean, and where do we all stand on it? So, but let's go to the Supreme Court decision, John, first. While we got you.
Right, and hopefully it lasts. So, sure, a lot of people have been obviously asking about this Harris Funeral Home decision that came down recently, and it really was a landmark decision. And in short, the court redefined the definition of sex as part of the Civil Rights Act, and specifically Title VII that dealt with employment discrimination. So it is now against the law for an employer to, in the court's words, discriminate against in hiring, firing, treatment in the workplace against, in that case, it was a transgender individual, but this also applies to the LGBTQ plus community. That's really what the extension by the court of the definition of sex applies to. And, you know, the ruling does, I don't want to say it's narrow, but the ruling tries to be narrow, and the court tries to say, and does say, that this applies to this specific case and it applies to a private employer-employee situation. And the court says, we're not making a ruling right now about how this might play out or how it might affect religious organizations or, you know, other organizations that are ministry based or things like that. They did say in their ruling, we're not addressing that. Now, there will be other cases and other instances that are certainly going to be pressed because of this court's ruling. It will be tested. It is coming. So, you know, there are protections in place for religious organizations. There's certainly First Amendment freedom of religion grounds. There's certainly, you know, there are exceptions even in the Civil Rights Act for ministerial positions. There is a separate act, the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, that is in play, and we just don't know how it's all going to play out. So yes, I would say that this ruling applies. I would make the argument that it applies in a limited fashion to a traditional employer-employee relationship. However, we are getting a lot of questions about how our different groups and PSPs can go about being proactive to put themselves in the best situation. And, you know, we're going to be developing some feedback on that and posting it on our different platforms or CHIA platforms. That's in the works, but certainly at this point, I would advise everybody to at least pull out, you know, their mission statement and their statement of faith and dust it off and give it a look. And, you know, first of all, see if there is one. There should be one, and start to consider, you know, pulling those documents out and making sure they're in place. And like I said, we're going to be offering some guidance, hopefully in the next week or two, to have some more feedback on that. But, you know, certainly it's a landmark decision. There are going to be religious freedom issues at play. It's just undeniable that it is coming. So we want to, you know, put ourselves and our members and our groups in the best position that we can to continue to operate as faith-based organizations and have a mission in line with biblical principles. So we're going to definitely be looking at that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, John. And yes, and please do stay tuned. We'll be making those recommendations, as John said, in a week or two. So we did already have a big meeting with our leaders across the state and talked about it. And so just to let you know that, yes, we're aware of it. We're concerned. And as John said, we're being proactive on that. So, so Nathan, you've been approached about AB 77, even though it has nothing to do with private homeschooling. I know in the CHIA office we have. John, you said you have. Can you, you know, in case this is new news to some people, just give a brief overview of what it is and what it means to private homeschoolers? Sure.
Yeah. First of all, AB 77 is a budget trailer bill. And what that means is, besides California's main budget bill that they have to pass every year to agree on how much money they're going to spend and where they're going to spend it, there are a bunch of extra bills that are attached to it In this particular case, AB 77 is the budget trailer bill for K-12 education, and it deals with education budget issues. 321 pages of it.
Wow.
So you can look through there and you'll see a lot of numbers. And this is a bill that goes through every year, or some version of it, because they have to establish what money they're going to spend on education and how much. AB 77 is very different from the version that Governor Newsom presented back in the early part of the year, pre-COVID. But this particular version has been amended a couple of times to reflect the changes that need to take place in order to account for the revenue shortfall that we're dealing with in California because of the economic state that we're in. And what that translates to is that it's 321 pages of budget cuts.
Oh, and everybody loves budget cuts.
Yeah, right. So everybody that has a program or is part of a program that is in this bill that gets cut, which is pretty much every part of education had to give something. And we know that every part of government is being reevaluated for funding right now. So this is just the education part of it. And so AB 77 does address public campus school, traditional public campus school funding, as well as charter school funding, whether that's a campus charter school or a non-classroom based charter school. So there have been concerns that the homeschool charters, those non-classroom based charter schools, or folks that are enrolled in a charter school but that don't take their kids to class regularly, those programs are being cut. There's funding that's being cut from them, and so lots of folks that are part of a charter school are concerned about that. And I understand that their funding for the things that they regularly do are being cut, and so it will have a real world impact for those families that are part of a charter school. There isn't anything that changes how private schools or private homeschools run in this bill, and because it deals with funding of public schools and charter schools. It doesn't deal with funding for private homeschools because we are privately funded, and it doesn't impact our funding. Now, I suppose that overall, at the end of the day, when we deal with the economic situation we're in, the government may end up saying we need to raise taxes. Now, that could impact the private homeschool family's budget, because that taxes come out of our wallet, and we have to figure out how to go from there. But AB 77 is dealing with the wallet of the public charters and the public campus schools. So that's the big concern there with AB 77 is how it impacts charter school funds. Now, that being said, private homeschooling not being impacted by this is a good thing, because we're still able to continue on doing what we've been doing for many years, and that is have the freedom to privately homeschool without the government saying you can't do that because we don't have the money for it. Well, that's not being said to us as private homeschool families, so we can continue doing business as usual in the private homeschool community, because we're not impacted by budget cuts like this. So we're here. If anybody realizes that they're not able to continue on in their charter the way they want to, consider privately homeschooling. It is an option that's there. There's a lot of freedom in the private homeschool world, and the water's fine. Yeah, absolutely. And I would just want to say a word to the many parents who don't like the way their public school brick and mortar campus is going to be operated this year. I know many parents don't want to send their children back to their day school wearing masks.
or with the many restrictions that are going to be, I want to say inflicted, but that are going to be instituted on the children as school starts in the fall. And many of them were looking at charter schools, thinking that, well, we will just enroll our children in a charter school home study program, independent study program instead. And now they're finding that because of the budget cuts, that these charter independent study programs are not able to take new students in, or they're very limited on the number of students that they can take. And so that's been very concerning. And again, as you said, this does not affect private homeschooling. You still you don't have to send your children back into a setting that you're uncomfortable with, or that you think is going to be very detrimental to your children. You can still either file a private school affidavit if you've established a private school in your own home, or you can enroll your children in a private school satellite program. But as you said, Nathan, the water's fine. Actually, it's a large, very warm, welcoming, experienced homeschool community with leaders that are really happy. Leaders are happy to help. Chia has our Facebook group, the Homeschool California, our Working Homeschool Moms Facebook group, our homeschool directory to help you find a homeschool group in your area. If there isn't one in their area, we can even help you establish one. But don't worry. I know that so many parents are very burdened with what it's going to look like in the fall, and Chia will do everything we can to help you. I just encourage you also to check out our summer series of events, of our virtual events. A lot of brand new to homeschooling content there too. So, but I'll put the links to all of these in the conversation in the comments below. And we'll also be moving this over within a couple of days. We'll be moving this conversation over to our YouTube channel. So if it gets buried in our feed, we'll put it over there. But Nathan, I'm sure you'll share this on your on FPM channel or FPM feed as well. So. Yes. Okay, well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I appreciate your time. We had a lot to talk about this month. I hope to be able to visit with you again next month on another Freedom Friday edition of Facebook Live.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Rebecca.
All right. Thank you. You guys have a great weekend, all right?
You
too.
Thank you.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.